From goblin labor to mechanical monstrosities, the Chaos Dwarfs have the widest possible assortment of units that will help your enemies find their way to the mines. I'm called Khorne, and today I will be making a unit tier list for the Dowie Tsar, as well as showing you how to build armies using these units. Before we begin, however, in order to rank their units, we first have to understand how the Chaos Dwarfs play on the battlefield. And well, the Dowie Tsar are a jack-of-all-trades faction, and pretty much master of everything. Cheap expendable trash, insanely powerful range units, strong infantry to hold the line, amazing artillery that will decimate anything on the battlefield, ridiculously powerful cavalry, amazing spellcasters, and for the cream on top, just a whole bunch of demon-infused mechanical monstrosities. So really, when it comes to Chaos Dwarfs, everything goes, as they are capable of adapting to every situation and excel at pretty much all forms of combat. However, a big component to deciding whether if or if not a unit will be good for the Dowie Tsar will also come in the form of how you increase their unit caps, and if recruiting a worse variant of a unit will make it so you won't be able to recruit the better one. So now that we have a very basic understanding of how the Chaos Dwarfs are unrivaled on the battlefield, let's rank their units based off that. As per usual, I will be ranking these units into 5 different categories. Doomstack worthy, where these units are ridiculously strong and can be made unstoppable. Bread and butter, these units are the units you should have as the backbone of your armies. Situational units, units that aren't meant for every situation, but can be very useful in certain situations and against certain enemies. Expendable trash, these units are there just to die and buy your other units time to dish out damage. And actual trash, where I would just recommend you not recruit these units. And so, now without further ado, let's start the ranking with our melee infantry. First up are Goblin and Orc Laborers, which will both go into the expendable trash category. Goblins are a bit cheaper, and the Orcs are able to dish out some damage, but just don't expect these units to perform any other role than being a meat shield. Next we have Hobgoblin Cutthroats, and they will go into the expendable trash category as well. They are a relatively poor choice of unit to hold the line, but will do a better job than just laborers. Then we have the Sneaky Gits, and these guys go into your bread and butter units. They are really good units to use in the early game. As for a tier 1 unit, they have good killing power, especially with their range attack. They are able to stalk, which will let you deal with the enemy range more easily, and they will do a relatively good job if you just send them into melee. Overall, just a really solid unit that you can make good use of in your campaigns. Next come the actually good units, and here we first have the Chaos Dwarf Warriors and Infernal Guard. I would say that both the Chaos Dwarf Warriors and Infernal Guard with shields go into the bread and butter category, while the Great Weapon variants will go into the situational category. I honestly dislike using the Great Weapon variants, as the extra killing power they get doesn't really make up for the survivability they lose. And since you have to choose between recruiting one over the other, I will usually always go for the shielded variant. Finally, the best infantry unit the Chaos Dwarfs have available to them will be the Infernal Ironsworn. And they do go into the Doomstack category, with amazing survivability and decent killing power, especially with their grenades. They are an amazing unit to bring onto the battlefield and can always deliver good value for you. Moving on to their range units, where we first up have the Hobgoblin Archers. This unit is deceptively good on the battlefield, with a really good amount of missile damage and really high melee stats. And for this reason, it goes into the bread and butter category. Then we have one of the most satisfying units to use in the game, the Blunderbusses, which will go into the bread and butter category. With amazing killing power versus basically anything, they are amazing at killing infantry, amazing at killing large units, or small single entities. And they would pretty much be perfect if it wasn't for their short range. And finally, we have the Infernal Guard Fireglaves, which will go into the bread and butter category as well. I would put them into Doomstack tier, as they absolutely destroy anything with their firepower, and they're good in melee, but because they're short range, they can suffer a lot when fighting against enemies that outrange them. Next up we have their cavalry, and there are really only 2 unit types here: the Hobgoblin Wolf Riders and the Bull Centaur Renders. The Wolf Riders, I would say, go into the situational category, as in a lot of cases I feel like they lack any real killing power, and they're there mostly just to either run down fleeing units or to get at the enemy range. Meanwhile, the Bull Centaur Renders, all three versions of them, will go into the Doomstack category. Really good killing power with decent speed, and if you give them the manufacturing upgrades, they will also become extremely difficult to kill. Now, all of the Centaur Renders have their capacity increased simultaneously, so specializing them for the enemy they will be facing is always a good idea. Next, we have all of their monstrous units, where most of these are decent enough and can be buffed heavily through your technologies, landmarks, and the manufactory. First up are the Great Taurus, which I will place as situational. They aren't a bad unit necessarily, and they can make a good enough Doomstack if you make a full army of them. But as is, they are a very basic unit that is really susceptible to enemy range units and isn't really amazing in melee either. Next we have the Lamassu, which will go into the bread and butter category, as they are much more versatile on the battlefield than the Great Taurus, by providing you with a couple of bounce spells, as well as removing enemy magic attack in an area, but they still aren't that amazing in melee, and are also extremely susceptible to enemy ranged. Then, for the last of your flying monsters, we have the Baal Taurus, which will go into the Doomstack category. They have a relatively good amount of health, are strong in melee, and have a breath attack that can dish out a decent amount of damage. Next we have the Kadai units, first of which are the Kadai Fireborn, a monstrous melee infantry unit with decent speed and pretty good killing power. This unit is also unbreakable until it falls below 25% health, which can help it survive a bit longer in melee without instantly disintegrating. Overall, I would say it is a situational unit, and I wouldn't really increase its capacity unless I needed units quickly, and the armaments cost for the other units was extremely high. Finally, we have the Kadai Destroyers, which I will place as situational. While I do like this unit, the cost of recruiting them is way too high for the job they are supposed to do, which is basically to kill enemy large units, as they are horrible at dealing with enemy infantry. Their job, however, can easily be done by any of your ranged infantry, flying monsters, heroes or lords, so really, unless you're in the very late stage of a campaign, when you have armaments you don't know what to do with, and just want to make a Doomstack of this unit, I wouldn't ever waste armaments trying to increase their capacity. Finally, we have the Artillery and War Machines. And since most of these share the same unit capacity, I will be judging them a lot more harshly. Starting with the Hell Cannon, which is the only unit here that has its capacity separate, meaning you will usually be able to get them at a lower armaments cost, and because it performs a relatively good job on the battlefield, I will be placing it into the bread and butter category. Next we have the Magma Cannon, which I will also place as bread and butter, a really good unit in most stages of your campaign, where it does decent damage to enemy infantry with its lingering fire effects. Then we have the Deathshriek Rockets, and this unit I will place as actually trash. It has really low killing power on both infantry and single entity units, and because it uses the same capacity as the other artillery units here, I would recommend you just never recruit it. Next we have the train units, the Iron Demon and the Skullcracker, and both of these go into the actual trash category. I really don't see the point of these units on the battlefield, as they are relatively bad at dishing out damage, and for being a chariot unit, they get stuck on enemy infantry way too often, which in combination with their size, makes them an ideal target for enemy ranged. And even if they didn't share the same capacity as the other units here, I would still just never recommend that you recruit them. Finally, we have the Dreadquake Mortars, and all of their variants will just go into the Doomstack category. An absolutely amazing unit, whether you just recruit the base variant of the artillery piece, or if you attach it to your train and you use up the double capacity, as this unit can just deliver unparalleled destined destruction onto the battlefield. Keeping it as a immobile artillery piece to save up the unit capacity is good enough, but can be a bit of a problem when the enemy reaches your front line. As if that bomb ever drops near your front line, well, you can pretty much say goodbye to whatever was near the impact zone. Having the artillery piece be dragged around by a train engine will give you much more mobility, which will allow you to use up more of your ammunition to dish out more damage to the enemy before they reach your front line and you are forced to stop firing. Well, that is pretty much it when it comes to your units. Next, let's talk about your lords, and here I would say that both options are valid. with Overseers being a decent choice to lead your armies with all of the buffs they can provide for them, and the Sorcerers are much better on the battlefield. As for your heroes, it is mostly the same as it is for heroes in general. Having one of each in your armies will help out a lot. Infernal Castellans will increase your campaign movement and will eventually be able to replenish ammunition, which will really come in handy when you get some Dreadquake mortars. Demon Smiths are just really good spellcasters, and Bull Centaurs are basically just a really strong melee combatant. Alright, so finally we have come to the army compositions part of the video, and well, there is a lot to talk about here. As stated in the beginning, the Chaos Dwarfs are basically the masters of every type of warfare there is. Whether you want to spam loads of cheap infantry, or field lots of giant monsters. The Chaos Dwarfs can pretty much do everything. Now, one thing you should be aware of is that most of the time when it comes to recruiting your armies, you won't have the armaments to increase the capacity of certain units. So using a temporary unit from the Hobgoblin lineup to fill the gaps will usually be needed. The first army that I want to talk about will be the balanced Chaos Dwarf army, which will look very similar to the balanced Dwarf army, where you will want to have 4 artillery pieces, which can be magma cannons and hell cannons early on, but later on you will want to swap them for some Dreadquake mortars. You will want to have 5 to 6 range units, which depending on your unit capacity, will either have majority blunderbusses or fireglaves in it. And if you don't have enough capacity to fill these slots, you can just use Hobgoblin archers as a temporary unit. Finally, you will want to have the rest of your units be melee infantry, which will usually mostly consist of Chaos Dwarf warriors, as it will be easiest to increase their capacity, but later on you can swap them out for some Infernal Guard or Ironsworn. And if you are missing some capacity for a full front line of these units, then you can put in some Hobgoblin Cutthroats as a temporary unit. Next we have your majority trash armies, and these armies will perform rather well for their price point. You will usually want to have either the majority of an army be Hobgoblin archers to dish out as much damage as you can, or have half the army be cutthroats and half be sneaky gits, or even better, have the entire army just be a sneaky git spam. Of course, you can make these sort of armies be insanely strong if you put Gordas in that army to just boost Hobgoblins by a godly amount. Personally, I love using a full army of sneaky gits led by Gordas, as they can become insanely strong, and they're almost even able to reach Doomstack levels of strength. You can also supplement these kinds of armies with a few of your Chaos Dwarf units that can carry the battle by themselves. Units such as blunderbusses or Bull Centaur renders, or even some artillery. And this way, you can create some fairly competent armies that can win battles against really strong opponents. Just know that the strength of these armies lies in their numbers, not their quality. So bringing in another army that would just be filled with laborer units to soak up damage is a good idea. Now, the next sort of army you can create will be a 50-50 mix of Chaos Dwarf units and Hobgoblins. Usually you would want to do this with either Bull Centaur Renders, Kadai Fireborn, or your Tauros and Lamassu units. And this is mostly due to the fact that you can make these units be decently strong on the battlefield by either providing them barrier or regeneration, and since these units also have decent mobility on the battlefield, if you just give them a trash-filled front line to keep the enemy's attention, you can go around and systematically destroy the entire enemy army. Alright, and lastly we have the Doomstack section of the video. And well, usually with the Chaos Dwarfs, you won't really want to Doomstack. You could try and get one for your Legendary Lords, but in most cases you will just want to create a decently strong mixed unit army, as that way you can get more units that cost you armaments. This is because if you try to get too many of the same unit, the armaments cost will skyrocket out of proportion, and you will find yourself wanting to get a certain unit, but their armaments cost will simply not be worth it. So it is usually best to spread out your unit capacity and get the cheapest option that you can. But if you still want to get some Doomstacks, these are probably the best you can make. First up will be the Bull Centaur Renders with Astragoth's Iron Hand, as he provides them with extra ward save and damage. And to make this one really work, you will also need to get the Gore Feast upgrade through the manufactory. They just have a good amount of speed, amazing killing power, and are insanely durable. Then we have the Kadai Fireborn and Kadai Destroyers with Stratos, which you can get up to 90% physical resistance if you get a certain banner. You can also place a Demon Smith on a Lamassu in the army to strip the enemy of magic attack. And this way, you can make the army be almost immune to enemy attacks, and they are capable of dishing out insane amounts of damage. For Zatan, you can make a Bull Centaur hero spam, as he provides his entire army with some minor buffs, which a hero spam can make really good use of. Or, alternatively, you can make a manipulative Demon Smith Doomstack with him. You see, the Demon Smiths have a trait called Manipulative, which lowers the leadership of enemy armies by 4. So what you can do is just make a spam army of these heroes, have Zatan lead them, as he also lowers enemy leadership in a region, and just watch as the enemy runs off the battlefield. And finally, for no specific lord, we have the Taurus and the Lamassu spam Doomstacks. Now, you can get a lot of physical resistance for these units, and with the Lamassu that removes magic attack, as well as Gore Feast from the Manufactory, you can make this sort of army be completely unstoppable. And since it is not strictly a 1-unit spam, the armament's cost of getting it isn't even going to be that high, as long as you spread the cost properly and not try to just spam one of these. And that is pretty much all I had to share with you for the Chaos Dalby units. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe for future content. Thank you all for watching, and until next time.
Khorne fights as one.